March 19, 1964 was a cold and dark day here in Elmira. It was the day 12-year-old Mary Simpson was found dead here on Combs Hill Road. Now, 61 years later, her case is finally closing.
For 61 years, nobody knew who did it. Then, in 2026, investigators made an announcement that shook Elmira to its core and made headlines across the country. They had finally identified her killer. It had taken 6 decades, a DNA sample invisible to the naked eye, a lab in Texas, and a FedEx package that almost got lost forever in an ice storm. This is the oldest cold case ever solved with DNA in American history. If you are new to this channel and you want to hear more stories like this one, stories about victims who waited decades for justice, about investigators who never gave up, about families who spent their entire lives hoping for an answer, please subscribe right now. Hit that button and join this community. We tell these stories every single week. This is the story of Mary Simpson. Who was Mary Simpson? Elmira, New York sits in the southern tier of the state, in Chemung County, surrounded by rolling hills and small-town neighborhoods where families have lived for generations. In 1964, it was the kind of community where children played outside until dark, where neighbors knew each other, and where a 12-year-old girl walking home alone on a March evening wouldn't have seemed like cause for alarm. Mary Simpson was 12 years old, shy, according to those who knew her, a girl who wore cat-eye glasses and carried a fan club card in her pocket. Her older sister, Linda Galpin, was 16 at the time. They grew up playing kick the can with neighborhood kids, skating up and down the street on metal-wheeled skates that clamped to the soles of their shoes and tightened with a key. Ordinary childhood things, the kind of details that stay with a family for 60 years. On the evening of March 15th, 1964, Mary left her relative's home at around 6:30 in the evening and began walking toward her own house. She never arrived. Her family reported her missing. For 4 days, the community searched. On March 19th, her body was found in a wooded area, 7 miles from her home, 7 miles from where she had last been seen. She had been partially hidden under 4 heavy stones. Her mouth was stuffed with dirt and twigs. The cause of death was asphyxiation. She was 12 years old. Elmira police opened a homicide investigation. Evidence was carefully collected from the scene, including biological material recovered from her clothing and preserved. In 1964, DNA testing didn't exist. Nobody at that crime scene could have imagined that the evidence they were bagging and logging would one day become the key to solving her murder more than 6 decades later. The decades of searching. For nearly 40 years, the case sat unsolved. Detectives worked it, revisited it, pursued leads. No arrest was ever made. The name of the person responsible remained unknown. In 2003, 39 years after Mary Teresa's murder, investigators took the biological evidence recovered from her skirt and submitted the DNA profile to CODIS, the FBI's national DNA database. It was a match to no one. The killer's DNA wasn't in the system. 11 years later, in 2014, the profile was resubmitted. Still nothing. Still no match. The case remained open. Elmira police never officially closed it, but without a DNA match and without new leads, there was no clear path forward. Then, in 2022, Elmira Police Sergeant William Goodwin was awarded a grant specifically for advanced DNA testing on cold cases. This grant would fund something new, not just resubmitting the old profile to CODIS, but sending the evidence to a specialized laboratory capable of doing something far more advanced. The DNA sample that remained was extraordinarily small, 0.4 nanograms. A nanogram is 1/billionth of a gram. The sample was so tiny it was invisible to the naked eye. It was the last usable biological evidence connected to Mary Teresa's murder. If this attempt failed, there would likely be nothing left to test. The package that almost didn't make it. FBI Special Agent Kenneth Jensen was assisting the Elmira Police Department with the case. He knew exactly what was at stake when he packed that 0.4 nanogram sample in dry ice inside a cooler and sent it via FedEx to Othram Technologies, the same specialized forensic DNA laboratory in Texas that had worked on other seemingly impossible cold cases across the country. Othram's entire purpose is to do what conventional labs cannot. They specialize in building complete genetic profiles from damaged, degraded, or microscopic samples. The kind of evidence that sits in evidence rooms for decades because older technology simply cannot extract anything usable from it. If anyone could build a DNA profile from 0.4 nanograms, it was them. But the package never arrived. An ice storm, a historic one, had shut down the FedEx hub in Memphis, Tennessee, the largest FedEx hub in the world. The package was stranded there, sitting in a facility that had gone dark, in a cooler full of dry ice that was slowly melting. If the dry ice ran out before the storm ended, the last piece of biological evidence from a 60-year-old murder would be destroyed, irreversibly, forever. Jensen couldn't reach anyone at FedEx. The storm had knocked out communications. He went a different route. The FBI had a liaison stationed at the Memphis FedEx hub, and Jensen reached out to the Bureau's own agents in the city. What followed was, in Sergeant Goodwin's words, a massive scavenger hunt. Agents physically searching a frozen, enormous distribution facility for one cooler containing one tiny sample. They found it, just in time. An FBI agent pulled the cooler from the facility and placed it in the Bureau's own freezer, where it remained until the storm passed and shipment could resume. Then it was sent on to the lab in Texas. The science could finally begin. The breakthrough. Othram Technologies received the sample and went to work. They extracted what they could from those 0.4 nanograms and built a genetic profile. Incomplete by conventional standards, but complete enough for the next step. That profile was uploaded into 2 public DNA ancestry databases, the same kind ordinary people use to trace their family history. Genetic genealogists, working in coordination with the FBI, began building family trees from the DNA matches that came back. Not matches to the killer himself, but to his relatives. People who had voluntarily submitted their own DNA to ancestry services, without knowing their results would one day point investigators toward a murderer. Branch by branch, generation by generation, the family trees narrowed. Eventually, one name emerged as the most likely candidate. A man named Raymond Murray. Murray was a truck driver who had lived in Elmira, New York, the same city where Mary Teresa Simpson grew up and died. He had raised a family there. He had lived an ordinary life on the surface. But old records told a different story. News archives showed that Raymond Murray had been arrested as a teenager for molesting 2 7-year-old girls. A history that, in 1964, with no DNA database and no way to connect past offenses to a current crime scene, meant nothing to investigators who had no reason to look at him. By the time investigators identified Murray as the likely suspect, there was a problem. Raymond Murray was dead. The exhumation. Jensen, by now retired from the FBI and working as a forensic case manager at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, told Sergeant Goodwin that NCMEC could help with what needed to happen next. NCMEC provided funding and the expertise of a forensic anthropologist to do something that is rarely done and never done lightly: exhume Raymond Murray's remains from his grave. In November of 2025, Murray's body was exhumed from his burial site in Elmira. It was an emotional day. Dozens of officers attended, many of them retired, men and women who had worked Mary Teresa's case years or even decades earlier and had never stopped caring about the outcome. They stood in the cold and watched as the process unfolded. DNA was extracted from Murray's remains and compared directly to the profile built from the evidence recovered from Mary Teresa's skirt in 1964. It was a match. Confirmed. The truck driver from Elmira, who had been dead for years, was the man who had killed 12-year-old Mary Teresa Simpson 61 years ago. Murray had been 33 years old at the time of the murder. He had lived the rest of his life in Elmira, raising a family, going to work, dying of natural causes, never arrested for what he had done to a 12-year-old girl in the woods in March of 1964. There would be no trial. There would be no prison sentence. On February 10th, 2026, Elmira Police Chief Kristen Thorne stood at a podium and made an announcement that she called a historic day for the Elmira Police Department. After 61 years, they had identified the man who killed Mary Teresa Simpson. It was the oldest cold case ever solved with DNA in American history. Chief Thorne said simply, "Justice," after 61 years. For Linda Galpin, now 78 years old, the news was bittersweet. She had spent her entire adult life, more than 6 decades, thinking about her little sister every single day.
She told NCMEC that she had always said it would never happen in her lifetime, and then it did. Her exact words, "I'm just glad justice was finally done." Mary Teresa Simpson was 12 years old. She was shy. She wore cat-eye glasses. She had a fan club card in her pocket. She left her relative's house on a March evening in 1964 and never came home. For 61 years, the man responsible had no name. He lived in the same city. He drove trucks. He grew old. He died. And the evidence that would eventually identify him sat in an evidence room, preserved by investigators who had no idea what it would one day make possible. It survived 61 years in storage. It survived an ice storm in Memphis that nearly destroyed it forever. And in November of 2025, when forensic scientists compared it to DNA taken from a grave in Elmira, it gave Mary Teresa Simpson something her family had been waiting a lifetime for. Her killer finally had a name. If this story moved you, leave a comment below. And if you want to see more cold cases like this one, cases where evidence waited decades, where families never stopped hoping, where one last attempt changed everything, make sure you are subscribed. We tell these stories every week. Thank you for watching.